Well, I'd like to say thank you very much for coming out on a rather miserable evening to hear me. Some of you, I'm sure, have been before to, if you can call them that, lectures of mine. I don't profess myself to be a lecturer, I'm just a talker. Some people say there's not very much difference, but nevertheless, I want, if I can, to particularly help those who are on the fringe of the subject. That doesn't mean to say that I ignore the rest of you who obviously know a great deal about the subject and have been in the movement probably for a number of years, but I always feel that the most important thing is to consider the beginners, the people who are seeking, the people who are, as it were, beginning to wonder what it's all about. Is there anything in this business of spiritualism? Is it possible to communicate with the dead? Do the dead really exist in another world? And is it feasible, is it possible that they can, at times, make contact with us in this material world? And I particularly am interested, obviously, in those who feel that they need something concrete. Those of you who studied this subject won't have to be told the obvious, and that is that in spiritualism, unfortunately, there is a lot of drivel, there is a lot of nonsense talked, often by people who should know better. I can only say this from personal experience as a medium, that the evidence, and I mean evidence, I don't mean something that could be or it might be or well, yes. I'm talking about the reality, the absolute certainty of evidence. Communication between the so-called living and the dead. This definitely does happen, but it doesn't necessarily mean to say that it happens all the time, and that all mediums are able to make that sort of contact where you receive irrefutable proof that cannot be gainsaid, cannot be talked away, or cannot be explained away by telepathy or whatever you like to put it down to. I have brought tonight with me some recordings taken at cities. Now, I do not necessarily expect, in fact it would be very wrong of me to expect you to accept just on face value something that you hear on a tape recording. But I can only say this, that these recordings of these voices were taken on different occasions, and they were not in any way rehearsed, they were spontaneous, they were not planned, they were not organized. We just sat, and it happened. But that doesn't alter the fact that often when I sit, nothing happens at all. And this, I would suggest, happens very often. Mediumship is not on track. There are people who say it's wrong to call up the dead. This, of course, is so stupid. No medium can call up the dead. No person, no matter how much they may long to communicate with some soul they have known and loved, and in the hope that they can make a contact, can call up the dead. I would suggest, and I think it's true to say, that at least a third of my sittings are complete and absolute and utter failure. All I can do as a medium is sit. And all I can ask of the people who come to me is to sit with an open mind. I don't ask them to be gullible. I don't ask them to accept everything as gospel. I don't ask them to leave their brains outside the seance room door. All I ask when anyone comes to me for sitting is that they will be at least open-minded, trying to realize, if they can, the difficulties. And there are many, many complexities and many, many difficulties in communication. We do not really know very much about communication. There are people who will, in fact I understand there are people, who will lecture for an hour about communication, how it happens, how it takes place, etc. Well, I'm not going to argue with these people, but in my opinion, very little is really known about the complexities of communication. As those of you who've read, I presume some of you have, the Sunday Express articles by a man of repute who approached my work in a purely scientific way and subjected me with others of like mind to serious tests using all modern equipment that they could devise or think of or bring into use, and still we are left with the obvious fact that communication, even under the most stringent test conditions, does take place. Doesn't alter the fact that we are still puzzled. I don't know all the answers. I wish I did, but of course that's probably as well as I cope. All I know is that under certain conditions at certain times, individuals, so-called dead people, do communicate. And sometimes they give evidence of such a nature that really one would have to be so sceptical, so absolutely illogical in one's approach to refute it. But of course there are people who do refute. Even the man who tested me under these conditions, and in spite of the evidence which he quite frankly acknowledges to be impossible to have faked, is still not 100% convinced. But that doesn't really matter. What I'm trying to say is that if people come into this movement seeking sincerely and diligently and honestly and realize the complexities of this whole subject, especially mediumship and the technicalities associated with it, if they go about it in an honest way, I am convinced that the vast majority at least will come to one conclusion, that there are no dead, that there are people whom we have known and loved, who take an interest in us, who love us still, and are endeavouring and at times do succeed in contacting us. And they give their evidence in their own way. And another thing about what is evidence of survival is not necessarily always what you anticipate or what you may hope for. I suppose it's human and natural that if a mother goes to a seance of the medium and who has lost her only son, that she has, to some extent, some preconceived idea or ideas as to what she would accept as evidence. This is human and this is natural, but it doesn't necessarily mean that the best evidence is that which you anticipate. In fact, the best evidence is that which you, at the time of receiving it, cannot perhaps even verify or accept or acknowledge. But afterwards, in discussion perhaps with some member of the family or some friends of the son in question, the person or persons involved says, well, of course, I remember that, so-and-so and so-and-so, that's absolutely so. Well, the mother responds, well, I didn't even know anything about it. This, in my opinion, is much better evidence than the obvious. So many people say within themselves, well, if my son comes and says so-and-so and so-and-so, I shall know that that is my son. All right. If it is sufficiently evidential for that person, so well and so good. That person is helped and that person is comforted. But, in my opinion, and I have spent 40-odd years in this work, and I have listened to thousands of communications, in my opinion, the best evidence is not necessarily the obvious, not necessarily that which at the time you accept, or that which you feel appeals to you or is acceptable to you. In other words, what I'm trying to say in a roundabout way perhaps is that when you sit with a medium, even though you may say, oh well, I don't understand that, or perhaps you're of the nature where you say, yes, well, maybe, or whatever. In other words, of course, it's a very, very good thing to keep notes, and better still in the modern age such as this, to use a tape recorder, because by using a tape recorder with a medium, you have there, verbatim, word for word, everything that has been said. And you will find often, when you play it back to yourself, or perhaps to friends or members of the family, that on that recording are certain statements which at the time you thought were not acceptable, or you thought they were even ridiculous, and you find that they were correct. There are many aspects to this whole subject, so many, and in a sense, too, many confusions. Those of you who have been in the movement for many years will be the first, I think, to admit that there are so many aspects of the subject which cause, at times, doubts and apprehension. And I think this is very justifiable. I don't think that we should go through this movement with our eyes shut. I'm not suggesting that people do, but I certainly think that there are many people in this movement who accept willy-nilly anything that is just given to them, just because a medium has said, her guide says this, or her guide says that. I could go into a lot of detail about guides, but this would take up a whole evening. I do not deny, obviously, the reality and the existence of spiritual beings on the other side, whom we term as guides, who come to us, who help us, to guide us, to uplift us, to inspire us, to encourage us. But at the same time, it doesn't mean to say that they're necessarily infallible. And there are people, I regret to say, who become rather caught up, perhaps, with a particular medium, and everything that particular guide says is gospel truth. And indeed, I have known people who have been so swayed by what has been termed guidance through a certain medium that really, quite frankly, it has not helped them very much. It's done them a great deal of harm. I want everyone who's deeply, sincerely involved in this subject to realize that they have a responsibility to themselves. They have a responsibility to this movement to present it in a way in which it can be acceptable to the rest of humanity. I've always said this, at certainly latter years I've said it over and over again. The harm done to spiritualism is from within its gates and not outside. There is so much nonsense talked in spiritualism by people who should know better, who profess to be sincerely involved and interested, who often themselves are mediums of a kind, and they're sincere enough, no one denies the sincerity, but I feel that this movement is not going on the right path. Now, these are my own personal opinions. Some people might, and quite rightly, they have entitled an opinion, will disagree with me. But I think that mediumship, before you can accept it, and before you can follow it, no matter who the medium may be, you must be absolutely certain and sure within yourself that this mediumship is genuine, that it is straightforward, that it is honest, that that which you are receiving is coming from the other side of life. Because I can assure you, a great deal that comes or purports to come from the other side of life has got nothing to do with spirits at all. It's very difficult, very often, for a well-meaning person, sincere and open and frank and honest, to always know, when they are mental mediums, how much may be coming from the other side, or how much may be coming from their subconscious mind, or how much they may be picking up by telepathic means. A lot of people in the movement don't like this sort of discussion, don't like this sort of talk. But until spiritualists can face the truth of this whole complex subject, until we can say to ourselves, well, we have got to find the reality, we've got to discard all the trappings, we've got to discard all the things which really in themselves have no real bearing or meaning, no real purpose in that in which we are trying to do and achieve. I would not like anyone to think that in any way I am endeavouring to discredit another instrument or another medium. That is not so. But I do feel that this movement, if it is going to progress, if it is going to affect the whole world, if it is going to bring conviction, if it is going to bring the comfort and the reality of the power of the Spirit to this world, we have got to look into ourselves, we have got to be very analytical, We have got to be highly critical. We've not got to accept everything on face value because we are told by this or that person that it is coming from the other side. We have every right to test the spirits. In the Bible, we are told to test the spirits and see if they be of God. Well, I know that we can test the spirits and prove survival. I know that we can receive evidence of such a nature that no one who is reasonably intelligent and frank and open and honest could refute it. But we've got to get rid of the mumbo jumbo, we've got to get rid of a lot of nonsense that goes on, and we've certainly got to try and present the subject so that we shall retain the people that come into this movement. And let us face the obvious fact that hundreds of people every year are attracted to this subject. They are seeking evidence of survival, they are seeking comfort, and they are seeking, without perhaps even realizing, something much more valuable, something which applies to every human being, and that is the reality and the power of the Holy Spirit which animates all of us, irrespective of class, colour or creed. In other words, what I'm trying to say is that it is a well-known fact that many people drift out of spiritualism in disgust, in disillusionment. And one should turn round and say to oneself, why? Well, there are many answers to this, and perhaps what I'm saying tonight is not what you perhaps really anticipated or have come here to listen to me anticipating I talk perhaps on an entirely different level. But I have now reached the age of 61. I have been in Spiritualism since I was 15. I have been a professional medium for roughly 40 years. I have demonstrated my gifts to thousands and thousands and thousands of people in all walks of life, of all nationalities. I have listened to evidence which has been so, even to me, after being so used to it, is so fantastic and so amazing and so uplifting and so, at times so inspiring. And it's because I feel the intensity of these things that I am very deeply, deeply concerned with spiritualism today. I know it's not considered the thing to make comparisons. I know at 61 people say, oh well, it's nostalgia, you're looking back into the past. Well, I look at the present age, present day in which we live. And for instance, this particular association has been in existence for roughly 100 years. No one denies, I'd be the last person to deny, that it has done tremendous good. It has helped thousands of people, comforted thousands, saved many from suicide, healed many people, and impressed and inspired others to work for the reality of which I speak. But it doesn't alter the fact, in my opinion, that we have not achieved anything like what we should have done in 100 years. We have had 2 world wars. We see the troubles in Ireland. We see Vietnam. We see so many ghastly things that are happening in the world. All right, we can hardly anticipate that a few thousand spiritualists here or there can probably make all that much difference. And yet, if we have this power of the Spirit within us, and we realize its potency, and what can be done with it, and by it, and through it, if we realize that we as instruments have this wonderful gift of communication, where great entities, great souls from the other side can reach us and inspire us, then I feel that we should have done much more than we have done. I know, as I said earlier, that there are many sincere people who are working in this movement. I know of many of them, and I admire them very much. But I cannot help but feel that the impact that we should have made on the world is very insignificant. People tell me, who should know, that never at any time in its history has spiritualism been more respected, more regarded, more talked about, more publicized. Constantly articles in newspapers, appearances on television, which are often a disgrace anyway, and do more harm than good, because they're not only badly presented, but they are exactly what people outside spiritualism think we're all like, a lot of idiots. The point is that where are we going, and what are we trying to do about it? Are we just content to go to a medium from time to time, or to a meeting, and listen and receive a message from Bert or Charlie or Fred or Harry? I'm all right, darling. Are you all right? Yes, I'm all right, thank you. Or, what shall I do about the shop? Do you think I should sell it? Or, do you think my husband's faithful to me? I don't have to tell you the obvious. It goes on all the time. Instead of dedicated people being anxious not only just to prove survival and the reality of a life to come, but to do something, to be active, to be anxious to serve, to spread this truth, this knowledge, to uplift humanity, not just merely to comfort temporarily, not just to get a message, or if you're in a quandary, expect the other side to come and solve your material problem. When I went to America, which I thought, in my innocence, was the home of great mediumship, in spite of the fact that I was entertained by people who I have great regard and respect for, mind you, and who are members of the American SPR, or the equivalent to the English SPR, who approach the subject on a very intelligent basis. I was amazed to find that practically everywhere I went, the only thing that really interested the vast majority of people was to have the fortune told. Now, if spiritualism is going to be a matter of telling people's fortune, and it goes on here just as much as in America, let me tell you this, under the guise of spiritualism, this is no good to anybody. If you want that kind of thing, go to Brighton on the pier for £5 and see Madame McCarthy. I'm concerned with the deep involvements of this great truth. I have listened to souls from the other side talking in a very intimate, personal way to their loved ones on earth. But behind all this, no matter how beautiful it may be, how comforting it may be, is the insistent desire of the Spirit that every human being in this world should realize the true implication of what is happening. We have got something that is so wonderful, but we abuse it, we misuse it, we do not aspire on the level of consciousness which we should to reach out to the heights that those of a greater awareness and consciousness and being, that they can reach out and come to us and help us and uplift us and inspire us to do great things. Here and there it may happen, I don't deny that. But talking about mediumship, time out of time people ask me this question about developing mediumship, how they should go about it, what they should do. And often I've heard people at my sittings where perhaps they've been in touch with some soul or other, occasionally a guide or inspirer, or if you like, a guardian angel, as the Bible puts it. And they have been told that they should sit and they should develop. Well, there are no shortcuts. Believe me, there are no shortcuts to good mediumship. If you want to be a medium, that is if you have the fundamental power within you, and I believe, sincerely believe that everybody has. I believe that we are spiritual beings while yet encased in flesh. If we accept the fact that we have physical attributes, physical powers, physical abilities which can be dormant, latent, which can be drawn out of us, developed and so on, So obviously can our spiritual faculties. And there is no reason why every human being should not be able to demonstrate the power of the Spirit in some shape or form. But there is no shortcut to success. When people ask me about this, I say, well, the obvious answer to that one is, if you can, try to find people of like mind, who are equally sincere as yourself, who are prepared to give up time and to sit regularly, weekly, at least once a week, indefinitely, giving yourself completely and absolutely in service, and not anticipating too much too soon, because it won't happen too soon. It will take time. The guides will experiment with you, they will find out what they can best do with you, what you are best capable of doing at a later date when they have to some extent developed you. They may do things which may even surprise you. But the point is this, that you have got to sit in complete harmony, in love. And if one person in that circle develops some gift, or shows some sign of developing some gift, then it should be a mutual joy. But what do we find? Unfortunately, being human beings, sometimes it happens, and I hear this over and over again, circles break up. Mrs. So-and-so is a little bit round off on Mrs. So-and-so, and why should she get this and why shouldn't I, and etc., etc. The human element. This is human. But one has got to sink oneself if you want to become an instrument, and forget yourself. Indeed, I go as far as to say, and in fact it was given to me from the other side, that the only way that one can evolve or become an instrument or serve is to forget yourself. And until you forget yourself, you will not find your true self. And I think this is a great truth. There is no shortcut. There's no way in which you can ever hope to become an instrument unless you are prepared to sit in a dedicated way, in a harmonious way with people of like mind. I don't even think it's necessary myself to have an experienced medium in charge. In fact, my experience has taught me that it is much more likely that you'll develop genuine mediumship without a so-called professional medium in charge. And I have very good reasons for saying that, but I won't go into the detail of them. In fact, you might find that you'll end up being an ersatz, very poor reproduction of what was originally or probably already a tatty medium. And I mean that. Give me a home circle of sincere, honest, dedicated people who sit in love and in harmony together, and in that group you will find the power of the Spirit will come. You don't need a professional medium who may mislead you. And believe me, many a so-called professional medium misled many a good medium. They put ideas into their head. They had given them impressions which never existed in reality and in the figment of their own imagination. Because they had to uphold their particular position. They have to make some impression. They have to give the impression that at least they're doing something. And personally, this is personal, though people who object to this, but I maintain that the only way, in my opinion, the best way, is when you sit harmoniously with people you know, you trust, you love. No one has any axe to grind. You're sitting there for the common good, in harmony together. You don't need a professional medium, because you will get the results, you will get the phenomena, you will get the guidance. Like will attract like, wherever you sit, whoever you may be. And if you sit in a frivolous, stupid way, then obviously you will attract frivolous and rather stupid people. And they will take you for a ride. But I have seen good mediums ruined by so-called professional mediums. I have actually sat in a circle, a developing so-called circle, many, many years ago. And quite a well-known professional medium was taken to this circle. And there was a little soul sitting over there, obviously going into a trance state, losing herself completely. She should have been left severely alone. What did the stupid medium do? Get up from her chair, get hold of the hands. A terrible shock to this poor subject, let me tell you. Come along, friend, come along. Get on your feet. You're all right. A lot of... I would know which word. You must forgive me. I'm a very intense person. I love mediumship. I love the reality of the power of the Spirit. I know what it's all about. I know its faults. I know the stupidities that go on, and how people are misled, misguided, how they're put on the wrong path by often so-called mediums who ought to know better, or perhaps they don't. Perhaps that's the point. They don't know better. They can't differentiate what comes from one side or what comes from this, or the other side and what comes from this. You see, there are dangers. And there are people who say, oh, physical mediumship's on the way out, and healing's taken its place, or mental mediumship's taken its place. Well, this may be true, but it's a very, very sad, sad thing. Because the history of spiritualism, the great scientific minds came to their conclusions of the reality of a life to come through physical mediumship. Crookes, Lodge, Flammarion, all these great men of science, they had to have something tangible. They had to have something that they could feel, that they could touch, something that was concrete, not something airy-fairy. And this is the sad fact that, as far as I know, there may be others, certainly in a professional sense, there are no voice mediums in this country or in Europe. For myself, I don't say this in any form of pride, because I'm just an instrument. I've been very fortunate. I have developed a wonderful gift. I say I have developed it. The other side have developed it. Nobody else did it. I've just been the instrument. But I think it's a terribly sad thing that there are no physical mediums, as far as I know, to follow me. There may be people who are sitting quietly in their homes who are getting results, and nobody knows anything about it. But unless we have first-class mediumship that can be tested scientifically, that can have an effect, that will produce results, I do not myself think that the world is going to be convinced by mental mediumship. There will be lots of people who will receive help and comfort, and who, for them, will be convinced of survival. But if we are to really make some real progress in this movement, we do need dedicated mediumship of a kind which can be analysed, dissected, tested, and so on. And any medium that is not prepared to offer himself to scientific research and tests, well, in my opinion, shouldn't be practicing. Because if you've got something that is real, you've got nothing to cover up, you've got nothing to hide, you've got nothing to fear. And even assuming that as a medium, because mediums are very sensitive, highly strung, emotional people, and the conditions under which sometimes one is tested, under scientific conditions that is, are not necessarily always of the kind which makes results successful. Let's face it, the very conditions under which I've sat at times under scientific condition and test have not always been very helpful to the phenomenon. But nevertheless, even if you fail sometimes, that doesn't matter. There's no disgrace in failure. But there is disgrace, in my opinion, when a medium refuses to allow himself to be tested. Then you have every right to be highly suspicious. And I don't necessarily mean that they should just be tested by friends or people who already become convinced of the particular type of mediumship. I'm talking about being tested by independent people who are not spiritualists, who are prepared to give up their time and also use equipment which they may have to hire at an expense, etc., to do this. I think that we should give ourselves, if we are sincere, we should give ourselves to this willingly. Of course, I'm not suggesting that a medium such as myself can always be under test conditions. That would be completely ridiculous. And if one were to accept every challenge, if I can use such a word, from every source, Or, I mean, I've had people who've written to me, and really, quite frankly, they've suggested this or suggested that. I was even, I can't remember the exact amount of money, but some very learned, I presume he's learned, his letter was well typed and written, and spelt well, he was a colonel, suggested that I offered myself to some group, I can't even remember what it was, and if I came through successfully, I think it was £100,000. Well, the mere fact of offering £100,000 made me think, well, I should never win that anyway, because they'd never even had that much to spend in the first place, and if they had it, they wouldn't let you have it. Because, quite frankly, I mean, I really mean this, some of these so-called researchers, well, they're not exactly the most straightforward and honest of people. But that's another story, I don't want to go into all that. Now, I brought some tape recordings. Now, I offer these to you with sincerity, because I think they will interest you. I don't know whether I should play all of it, because it does run quite a while, and I'd like to leave some time for answering of people's questions. And I always find that myself the most stimulating part of the program. But I brought this along because I think you'll find it interesting, and so much talk has, so much has been said over the years about my interest in Valentino, the great silent film actor. I thought it might be interesting for you to hear his voice. Now, unfortunately, during his earthly lifetime, which was before electrical recordings that we had, he never made any gramophone record. He did make a gramophone record of himself for fun, like we do at times, or have done. He made a recording of himself singing the Kashmiri song from the Indian Love Lyrics, and on the other side a Spanish piece of music called El Relicario. But of course that doesn't give you any idea of what his speaking voice is like. But as a point of interest, not that it will, I don't offer this as evidence, but when I was in Hollywood this year, or rather, well yes, this year, the beginning of this year, I had the good pleasure and joy to meet his brother Alberto, who is now 80. And I was so struck, although the man is so much older, I mean Valentino was only 31 when he died, and Alberto is now in his 80th year, I was so struck by the similarity. It's easy for me to say this, I don't know if this is evidence, but I was so struck by the similarity in Alberto's voice, Valentino's brother's voice, and the recording, except in the Valentino voice is so much younger. So you'll hear, first of all, Mickey, and this was taken, this particular beginning of the sitting was taken just on the spur of the moment. It was not on a pre-arranged thing, it wasn't an organised sitting, it was just that, well, we felt we'd sit and see what happened, and with Mickey comes and Valentino speaks, and then after that, you'll hear the voice of Emma Harding Britton, who was one of the great founders of Spiritualism, and after that, a short extract of Oscar Wilde. And for a point of interest, we did play, or this recording of Oscar, this is only a snitch of it, this recording of Oscar Wilde was played to his son before he died. But unfortunately, he said that of course he only remembered his father when he was a little boy, because of the happy state of affairs of Oscar Wilde and prison sentence. His mother wouldn't allow him to see his father. But he found it very interesting, and he thought, he didn't say it, I'm not saying he said it to his father, but he did imply that it could well be. And then you'll hear, if there's time for all this, there's such a lot on this, a conversation between a Dr. Nanji from Sweden and his wife. Dr. Nanji comes over from Sweden and sits with me from time to time, and he has had the most extraordinary evidence and conversation with his wife. And then there's a little bit at the end of Mickey, but I don't honestly think we have that much time to play all this. So we just play some of it anyway, and then I'll throw the meeting open to questions. So if you want to have a go at me, I'm only too glad to have a go at you. And what we think? April 1963. Neither knows the same. No, I switched it on.
Yes, he's got a new suit on tonight. Oh, can you see him? Yeah. What is this tonight, though?
Nothing, we just changed it. That's what I haven't changed.
Is that all you're going to say tonight? don't know yet. Oh. Are you in touch with anybody besides yourself, sir? You mean am I in touch with Well, I am, sir. I'm a pretty miserable existence on the earth. You are funny, Rosie. Why did you say anything like that to me? I don't touch with anybody else besides yourself. I fancy you said it. You didn't. I did, really. Really? Just see what you mean. I didn't say you were touched by any man on the earth. You said, are you in touch with anyone else but besides yourself? Yes. Well, that's wrong. Who was around tonight, Mickey?
Would it surprise you very much if I were to say that I was around?
Madame, somebody said. No, it wouldn't surprise me at all. All sounds is surprising. That's the beauty of it. We
I'd like very much to have the pleasure and privilege, if I may, of calling you Rose, or perhaps Rosa, which is so much nicer.
It is, but who's speaking? I seem to recognize that voice.
Well, I would like to think that you recognize my voice. I have spoken to you before, and no doubt you have been listening to some of the recordings that have been made downstairs.
Yes, I know who that is.
Valentino.
Yes, Valentino.
I would like, if I may, have the pleasure of calling you Rosa. If I may also come and speak to you occasionally.
Certainly. Can you tell me, Rudy, and I call you Rudy?
Can you
tell me why it is that you have such a strong hold on so many thousands of people? There must be a very deep meaning for this.
Well, shall we first of all discard the obvious answer to that?
Yes?
And go on to what I like to feel is the real answer. That is the answer, shall I say, that I like to feel in myself is the real answer to this.
That's what I want.
Tremendous problem.
Yes.
In a kind of way it is a problem. But for now, I like to feel that those people who remember me not just merely as a film actor, but as somebody who contributed something to their lives that perhaps very drab and very lonely and unhappy. For a few moments I was able to give them some little color, perhaps a little romance. That in itself, I suppose, is a wonderful thing, that one has the opportunity, or has had the opportunity and the privilege of doing that. But more important still, I like to feel that in some way I was able to reach them and perhaps, who knows, help them in various ways, not just only momentarily or materially, but perhaps because of their interest in me, they have in some instances we know have sought for deeper meanings and deeper purposes behind life. And I know that this is so. My own life was on earth was perhaps from the earthly point of view rather short, but in that short time perhaps I myself was able to discover certain things which give to me great internal happiness and realization, and in turn perhaps those who have known of these things, of my interest in spiritualism for instance, and psychic things, in turn have also sought for truth and have, through my instigation, indirectly discovered it.
When you have your session, it is in a kind of way like a light shining in the darkness of the world. It is a ray which seems to draw and attracts innumerable souls towards you. Some who are near the earth, of course, will find persons, souls who are in need of help, and of course those and other spheres, some of course who are known to you, who come at regular intervals, and then of course the guides of the instrument, whose task it is to prepare the way for certain individuals who have something of importance or interest to convey. But it is an extraordinary sight. If it were possible for you to witness the manifestation of power that emanates all around and about you when you sit. Some of them, of course, come to you in your home and are conversant with your thoughts and the work that you're doing, and in consequence, when you come here, endeavour to be present. They may not speak. Perhaps in some instances they have no particular desire to speak themselves, but they come with love, with a desire to assist and to help some particular soul who has been chosen to speak in a sense for them all. And of course there are diverse conditions, and these conditions must from time to time affect the results that you receive. But nevertheless, when the channel is clear, when the way is found suitable for a communicator to make himself or herself, as the case may be, felt, when they can assert their personality and can make themselves audible, and are able to clarify their thoughts, transmitting so much of themselves to you, then you receive what you must feel obviously is a good contact. But of course there are many people in your world who are inclined to jump to conclusions, who are inclined to be dissatisfied if the channel isn't clear, if the communication isn't perhaps as they would wish, and there are those who dismiss quite casually the efforts that are made by souls with good intent and purpose in their desire and hope to be of service. There are those in your world who have little or nothing to offer themselves, either in the way of mediumship as such, or in knowledge or experience of these things, who, unless it fits in with their preconceived ideas or notions, are inclined to turn aside and scoff, even when perhaps a great effort has been made by some soul on this side to break down the barrier between our world and yours. We realize that we are often, as it were, knocking our heads against the proverbial brick wall. But what makes it, of course, sometimes very distressing is that when all the work and all the effort that has gone into a particular session or communication, that it is not always received in the spirit in which it is given. We do not suggest, or indeed anticipate, that every individual who listens to the voice of the Spirit shall accept it completely and wholly. In the beginning, they themselves, quite rightly, have their own free individual attitude of mind and approach, and they are free to accept or discard. But there are some, particularly, that we find very distressing, inasmuch as they have knowledge and some experience, and yet if it does not fall in with that which they hold, their own personal aspect of truth, put it like that, they are only too ready to turn aside.
Oh, you might as well know. My name is Wilde.
Oh, I've read your book. Yes?
How fortunate you are.
Yes.
I I say how fortunate you are to have read my books.
Yes, I have. Yes, okay. That's one of these. Wonderful.
I suppose I should be highly flattered to know that you read my books and actually got one or two. I would suggest that you bought them, which is very nice to know. Not that I'm getting any of the royalties. No doubt you belong to a very good library.
Well, can you tell us something of your life on the outside now? What you're doing?
Well, I must admit it's a relief to be asked to discuss one's life over here in preference to one's life when on Earth, because in any case my life when on Earth is pretty well known among the gossip mongers. I'll say to you, my life here is not unlike my life on Earth. You'd probably be very horrified, but it happens to be perfectly true. And I have no regrets about it whatsoever. I'm perfectly happy and perfectly contented, and I live a life of delicious things. But only the world sees sin, because as the world sees sin, it is no longer sin here to be human and to be natural. But on Earth, to be natural is to be sinful. But over here one can be sinful because it is natural. But the world has strange ideas of sin. I live a natural existence here and I'm perfectly happy.
Oh, goodness me. I'm so hard. Nothing?
Well, this does happen, but it doesn't necessarily always happen. We have to remember there are many complexities, and that a voice that you hear at a sound such as mine is really an artificially produced voice. By this I mean that the voice is produced by those on the other side whose task it is to create an ectoplasmic voice box. And the individual who's communicating has to concentrate their thoughts and as much of themselves as they can into this. And it depends so much on the individual as to whether they make a good contact and they reproduce, as it were, an aspect of their physical self. Because they no longer have the same earthly physical body. They no longer have the vocal organs necessary for speech. They are not communicating under natural, normal conditions. What they are doing is vibrating the atmosphere, our atmosphere, by their thought forces, utilizing an artificially produced, temporarily produced voice box. And that is vibrating, and we are hearing that individual, in a sense, artificially. But that doesn't alter the validity and the reality of the communication, because in some instances the voices are so clear-cut and so decisive and so full of personality and so full of the characteristic of the individual. And we have had, obviously, people like Dr. Nanji, whose tape I haven't played, whose wife, he tells me over and over again, and he's vouched for this publicly, is identically his wife's voice as he knew her in life. Now, I don't want to go and talk too much anymore. I've said enough for roughly an hour, I guess. Now, if I can answer any questions, I don't profess that I can answer everyone's question. Obviously, I don't know all the answers. There's still many things I don't understand myself. Now, any who wants to ask the first question? Oh, this is unusual. No one. I'll come back to you in a minute. Yes, ma'am?
Is it necessary to sit in exactly the same room each time you have a sermon?
No, I don't think it's necessary to sit in the same room. I think it would be very nice if one could. I do believe that if it is possible for a sincere group of individuals who are gathering together to form as a circle, that if they can sit in the same room on the same evening at the same hour, and if possible, that room could be used more or less, where possible, exclusively for that. This is admirable, of course. It's everyone's desire, I suppose, who has a circle or wants to join on the circle. But of course this isn't always practical, this isn't always possible. I mean, some of the best sittings I've ever had have been in the bathroom. When I've been on holiday, we've had our sittings just the same. When I've been away perhaps for 6 weeks or something, we stayed in a hotel, and in the hot sunshine of New York, it was a long evening. For instance, you couldn't get the room dark, so just went and sat in the lavatory. And I sat on the toilet seat, and somebody sat on the edge of the bath, somebody sat on a stool or something, and we still got results. But then, of course, I suppose one could say that I'm a developed medium. But the point is, seriously, I think it would be a very great asset if you could sit in the same room, of course, but if you can't, I would say carry on. I mean, after all, it's better than not sitting at all. Yeah, I think,
I don't know very much about this, but...
No, no, I love so
You've established there is communication with the dead. Well, what do they do besides give you messages?
Oh, well, lovely, you must remember that the minute... This is another aspect. People often say, oh, well, why do they come if they can come, and waste their time coming back here, and it's wrong to call them up and take them away from presumably what is to them a paradise. Well, of course, obviously, the amount of time they spend with us is insignificant. And if I were to go into the detail, or spend a lot of time, which one could, on the varying aspects of what they do on the other side, I mean, this would take a whole many evenings, because it would depend so much on the individual. For instance, what one person would find happiness in on the other side, another person may not. And every individual creates, to some extent, his own heaven, and if you like, his own hell. I don't mean by that the old orthodox idea of hell at all. In other words, let's put it in a nutshell, that a person, whether it's in this world or in the next world, is no more than as he thinks. In other words, as you think, so you are. You are no more and you are no less. You create your own heaven. And you've got to remember also that the other side is a state of mind. If you can see it in that way, which is the simplest way I know how to describe it, it is absolutely a state of mind. That's why you do get messages which to some people outside this movement, when they hear of it, they think it's so damn funny. For instance, somebody will come through and say, oh, when I arrived, I wanted a cup of tea. Now this sounds so stupid. But then again, what you've got to remember is that when a person arrives on the other side, their state of mind is the predominant factor. All right, there are friends, there are relations that are there to greet them, who want to sort of settle them in, as it were, and help them. And often a person has this mundane material something that is clinging to them. And it may be so mundane, but to them it is something that is very vital. And a person on the other side will desire certain something or feel the need for something. I had a sitting today, I shouldn't talk about this, I suppose, there's no reason why not. I had a sitting today of a group, and there was a man who came through, and he was, I thought, for a person 10, quite a remarkable communicator. And he started talking about conducting an orchestra. And I thought, I didn't know who he was, I mean, nothing to me. But it's quite obvious that this man, in fact I discovered afterwards, because the sister told me, because she said, you didn't know who that was, did you? And he sort of perking himself up, she's very proud to have known the man, And I said, no, I thought he was quite good. Oh, she said, well, he was, and I won't mention his name, but a very, very famous conductor who died just recently, and she was a very great personal friend. And they had a conversation, and he said, oh, well, I'm still carrying on with my music, and I'm going to get my own orchestra. You see, this is what makes, to me, the reality of this. I mean, it's true, you can get something said from the other side which, well, you say to yourself, well, that sounds very interesting, but, well, is it, I mean, one doesn't necessarily anticipate that one should accept everything as gospel, but I do, inasmuch from my own mediumship, I can't speak for everybody else's. If somebody comes from the other side, whom I've known for years as a marvellous communicator, provided marvellous evidence, and they say something that seems to adulterate to me, I think, well, there must be something in it, otherwise I wouldn't say it. In other words, the other world is a world of reality. It's a creative world, where people are not just flying around and clanging harps and sitting naked on clouds. Some of them look bloody ghastly. We did. In other words, it's a real world of real human beings according to their level of consciousness, according to their evolution or lack of it, or so on. It's a world where we shall all obviously find each other in the conditions under which will be present to us until we begin to desire to evolve away from some particular condition to something better. It's a gradual process of evolution. As I could, it takes too long to go into all the aspects of it. And people always say, well, where is he? The other side. They want some geographical something. Well, I can't answer that one either. Anyway, who's next? Oh, yeah. Oh, I'll come to you.
Thank you. In Sunday's Express,
Yeah.
Mr. Robert Chapman
Yeah.
states that darkness is essential for physical mediumship. Is this the case?
Well, you see, I want you to bear in mind that Mr. Chapman, bless his heart, is a remarkably nice person, a very genuine and a very sincere seeker. But he doesn't really, and I'm sure he'd agree with me if I said that he was present, he doesn't really know a great deal about the subject. He is an intelligent person who's seeking the reality or the truth of survival. He is not yet fully convinced. And there are obviously many factors about this subject of which he knows little or nothing. That is no reflection on the gentleman who's been very honest and very fair to me. But, what was the question? I'm afraid you've gone blank. Oh yes, the darkness. Yes, well, for physical phenomena, it is best to have darkness. Well, they tell us that ectoplasm, which is a living substance, which is drawn from a medium, such as myself, is utilized by them to build up what they term a replica of the vocal organs necessary for speech. But when light intrudes or comes into the ROM, it breaks this up. In other words, they cannot presumably, what they tell us, keep it in shape. This is the only way I can describe it. That it begins to disintegrate. And that is why we have sittings invariably in the dark. But I would also like to point out that I've also received voices unexpectedly, not when I've been sitting for them, when the light's been put on. They have not necessarily been strong, and sometimes we have experimented, and indeed I've had people accommodate people, to be quite frank about it. I was much younger, and I was able to do more than I can do now. And I used to accommodate, and we used to have sometimes a red light. I'm on rheostat too at one time, we used to build it up. But the best results, I'm talking from my own point of view, my own leadership, I would say in the dark. Alright?
It's also dangerous for life.
Well, yes, it can be dangerous. I mean, this did happen once only in the whole of my career, and that was when I was about 30. And the strange thing was, it was done by a young man who had marvellous evidence, so marvellous that he just couldn't believe it, obviously. And then the next time they came deliberately late. But never mind, he switched on the torch in the darkness and I was ill for a week. But that's old history and it's not important. Now, I must give someone else a chance. Who's next? Yes, you and the wife.
Yes, is there any record of any communication with Florence Nightingale? I'm preparing a lecture on
I don't know, is it?
Have your views on the so-called Rhode Island electric?
Well, you're on the wrong ground with me there, mate, because quite frankly I don't really know much about it. Funnily enough, I was in Ireland on television, and the man who was connected with that, who wrote the book, Bandit, he was on the panel, and they played some of the extracts, and of course I had heard some of them. I really honestly can't say. I believe that one should always have an open mind. I see no reason why it should not be possible, and I certainly do remember some many years ago, Sir Oliver Lodge, who made a contact with us, said that they were trying to find a way of making contact where a medium would not be used, and this could well be it. But if you ask me anything about the technicalities and all the rest of it, I really am ignorant. I don't know.
Is it not possible that this would be filling the void due to the lack of direct voicing?
Well, all I can say is I certainly hope it is, but I certainly hope it improves. Because, I mean, what I've heard, I mean, is very itty-bitty, and not very clear, and they speak very fast, and it has to be slowed down, I believe. But then again, I have no right to really make much comment, because I really don't know much, if anything, about it. But I think there's a great field there which could produce something that's really marvellous and exciting in the future. Now, who's next? Yes, young lady, with a green... What are you doing with your head?
I'm not...
Yes, you know.
Earlier on, that it wasn't necessary for a professional medium to lead a circle. Well, surely the uninitiated need some basic instruction.
No, we're on dangerous ground, you know. This is the holy of holies here, you know. And they develop mediums here, and they're professional mediums. I'm an outsider who comes and gives his services, trying to do his best and saying what he thinks and the way he feels it and the way he knows it, but I'm not infallible. Personally, I've said this, I don't think that professional medium is necessary.
How about
What, love? Can you speak up, lovey? I'm getting deaf as I get older.
surely the uninitiated need some instruction.
Well, all I can say is that the uninitiated, as such, shouldn't have anything to do with it, from the point of view, that is, of sitting to develop. Because I think that would be rather stupid. I'm assuming, naturally, that a person who's become sufficiently interested in this subject, that means that they have read a number of books, perhaps they've gone to various meetings, they have got some idea of what it's all about, that it would be quite all right. I see no reason why it should not be, if they are sincere in their approach and their attitude of mind, sitting with people of like mind and like desiring, be perfectly all right. You're just as likely to pick up something unpleasant sitting with a professional medium, and probably more so than you are sitting without one. Because some of the professional mediums I've known have had some very unpleasant people around. I'm wicked, you know, I admit it. Pardon? What, love?
There are various such things that people may not realise that you shouldn't touch someone who's gone into a trance.
Well, believe me, I can assure you that I have experienced things and I have seen things which have horrified me. I mean, if a person is sitting in a circle and they are losing consciousness, and it's pretty obvious that something is happening, the best thing that one can do is to leave that person alone. For someone to suddenly take hold of their hands and start yelling in their ear hole, "Come on, friend, come along, you can come now." Nothing is more definite that's going to upset that person and affect that person, be detrimental to that person, and could do them a great deal of damage. And I don't believe that it's a good thing for a medium to auto-suggest, which a lot of mediums do, into the fertile mind of a developing individual certain ideas. My idea of a medium developing others is for a medium who keeps their mouth shut. And when the developing person in the circle is being used, and perhaps someone has taken them over, and they give certain information or whatever it is, and it confirms what the medium has already seen within herself, or has heard, or whatever, that is good. But for the medium to suggest, "Your guy Joshua's there, I can see a white feather sticking up here," you know, and that you're auto-suggesting all the time to fertile minds who are anxious to be mediums all sorts of things which may or may not have any factual value. And this is my contention. I think that that people who sit in complete harmony together, with no preconceived notions, no one there to auto-suggest things to them, are much more likely to develop genuine mediumship than sitting with people who are already going to start implanting all sorts of things in your novel. This is my way I feel about it. Now, who's next? No, it's just, I'll come to you, though. Your hand. I'll give you some views. Yes, madam.
Could you tell me if you experience any physical depletion on your regular daily work, or has it got?
Oh, yes.
Yes,
I do. I mean, obviously I do. I mean, I feel as I'm getting older, particularly, that after sitting, I'm absolutely washed up, you know. And with the best intention in the world, one wants to help everybody, and that's an impossibility. I mean, I cannot possibly conceivably see anywhere near 1/10 of the people that write to me for sittings, because, I mean, it's physically impossible. A medium can only do a limited amount, and I do far more than I should. and I feel sometimes so exhausted. And if I were not to be careful and sensible, and I hope I shall be eventually, I'm trying to be, and curtail the amount of work I do, I might even lose my mediumship and my health in consequence. This is the problem. There are not enough physical mediums. There are not enough kind of mediums who can provide that kind of evidence. And unfortunately, since I'm the only one, as far as I know anyway, I get all this publicity, which, by the way, I've never sought. It's always been thrust upon me. I've never sought any of this publicity. And in consequence, I get sackfuls of letters, and it just adds to my problems. Apart from my sittings, I get all these, I wasn't going to use the dreadful word again, letters to answer. And you can't ignore people if they write you, send a standard address envelope. Some people have written to me twice and said they didn't hear the first time. I don't know why. But anyway, I do my best. Now, who's next? I can see a hand sticking up. You, sir.
Yes, your mediumship is direct voice.
Yes.
In addition to, or separate from, the voice through the trumpet.
Well, yes, it's quite separate for the simple reason, although years ago, mind you, we used to have a trumpet in the circle. I'm talking about when I was in my late 20s, sort of thing, and it used to float about the room and the voice used to speak through the trumpet. But I do not use trumpets, no paraphernalia of any description or whatsoever. The voices are independent. I'm very unusual if I go into a trance, and I often talk during the session and so on to the sitter and sometimes the voices. No, I'm not a trumpet medium, I would call myself. Yeah, I didn't start, but the other side started with a trumpet. We had the trumpet in the circle and they lifted it and they spoke through it.
Would you say that that's a good idea?
I think so, yes, because after all, what is the trumpet for? It's merely to amplify sounds which are very weak. And in the early initial stages of the development of a voice phenomena, you will have these weak little voices, and therefore the trumpet will magnify or amplify. I think that a trumpet in a circle, and also from another point of view, if you're sitting in a dark circle and you've got a trumpet and you have a little luminosity on it, in the dark you can see it, and then if it moves, then at least you have some satisfaction knowing something's happening because something is moving around, and if it, as it will, if it moves eventually, and it touches you and you hear with the voices, I mean, this is worth doing. This is what I keep saying to people. To my way of thinking, this is one of the most wonderful things in spiritualism. This reality of a direct contact with people on the other side who can speak to us. This is tangible. This is not, is that you, dear? I mean, that's all right. It does a service. But if you hear a voice, if someone comes and speaks to you, it's audible, you can record it. This is the reality of communication. And this, to me, is so important. This is why I like to feel that there are people who are anxious and sincere enough to want to sit and develop. But don't expect wonders, because it won't happen quickly. It may take years. It took me 7. Now, who's next? Right at the back.
One more point on that.
What?
I'm getting at. With many bridges this afternoon, we were told to start in our broken circle with the trumpet. You will see us afterwards to give us advice on it. Now, are there any points of advice? You mentioned, for instance, all members of the circle to breathe through the trumpet first before...
Just breathe through it?
That's what she said. Well, I'll do it.
No, quite. Well, I'm not going to argue with Mrs. Bridges, but I don't even know the sweet lady. Whether breathing through the trumpet's going to help, I haven't a clue. It might help, I don't know. I can't see it can make the slightest bit of bloody difference, but I'm more concerned about the other people from the other side communicating to the trumpet with someone on this side breathing through it. I mean, it may have some meaning, I don't know. Maybe for Mrs. Bridges, but... I mean, I can't say so because I don't know. I don't think it makes the size of a difference who breathes through it, as long as somebody speaks through it.
What advice have you got to the setting or situation, timing?
Right, for community to have a trumpet in the circle. Then you've got to develop from there.
Yeah, but I don't get this business of all breathing.
No, but I mean, they obviously haven't had a trumpet in the circle at present, and therefore...
No. Can I clarify? Are you telling me, sir, that you and the lady, I presume, are sitting in a circle together where you're sitting for the trumpet?
We are sitting for development. We'll be told this in our next stage. We're asking you as the expert for advice. We will have the trumpet in the centre. We will have it anywhere.
Yes, in the centre, but I thought... I thought I explained that to you, sir, about that having the trumpet in the circle and the luminous pane so you can see if it moves around. I'm not being facetious. I hope you don't think I'm treating your inquiry facetiously.
On any particular material, does it matter whether...
Oh, I see. Yeah, but you see, you sidetracked me about breathing to the trumpet business, you see. But, I mean, for instance, look, sir. Supposing you put the trumpet on a piece of hardboard in the centre of the room, and you chalk round the trumpet, the base of it, where it stands. Even if you hear nothing during the session, if when you put the light on, you see the trumpet has moved a fraction from that chalk line, at least it's some encouragement to know that somehow, somewhere, somebody has moved it. It may be fractional to begin with, but once it begins to move, and it moves right off the chalk outer line round the trumpet, you'll know then that you're certainly on the way of getting something of a physical nature. That's all I can say. I mean, we won't spend a long time discussing physical phenomena. Yes, Mr. Bliss, I can see you right up in the corner, and thank you very much for the very nice letter you wrote to Psychic News about me.
Could you tell us what the reactions were of your Irish audience?
Am I what?
Irish.
Oh, mixed bag. I had 2 sticky nuns in the front row. I didn't even know they were nuns until afterwards. We all had a reception with drinks, and that they were knocking it back better than anybody else. But no, seriously, jokes apart, a very good reception, because there were some very intelligent people among the audience who really asked some intelligent questions, and also 1 or 2, much to my surprise, obviously people who knew a great deal about this subject, and even quoted from books of, I think, St. Moses or some well-known personalities of the spiritualist path. No, I found that, in a general way, that they were quite open-minded. Of course there were those sticky ones too, like the sticky nuns, but they were rather sweet, really. It's one of those. Now, who's next? I can see a hand sticking up behind the man who... Yes? Yes, yes?
Has the continental person or Asian spirit found it easy to communicate to you in their own language?
Yes, well, we have had people, obviously, who communicated in other languages and have spoken. You asked me a frank and open question, I'll give you a frank and open answer. I think there are difficulties. I think where the thought force is predominantly English, and the medium is English, and the whole atmosphere and condition around that medium is English, I think that there are sometimes difficulties with some communicators speaking in another language. You might ask, well, why should it? But there's no denying that this does sometimes present problems, but it doesn't alter the fact that we have had contact and communication at odd times with people speaking in other languages. And with 50,000 Asians coming, there might be more problems. My friend was telling me about the Egyptians that we've got, but nobody can speak to them because nobody knows their language or knows how to pronounce it. Yes, dear?
When people come over from the other side or get through from the other side, has God ever been mentioned?
Oh, this is a question that always pops up at my meetings. Somebody sooner or later always asks me about God, you see. I think this is something which can only really be answered in one way. I mean, after all said and done, let's face it, what is God? Who is God? I mean, God is a word. You can call him Jehovah, you can call him this, you can call him that. And I think that the other side, when they come back, though they may not discuss or talk about God in the sense that perhaps some people might even wish if they're religiously minded, it doesn't alter the fact that they realize there is a supreme power which is beyond that comprehension, just the same as it's beyond ours. And if you're going to refer to them or talk to them about God, they will use the same word, but they'll still be as much in the dark as you are or I am. In other words, what I'm trying to say is, of course, they recognize and they tell us about this tremendous force, this power, this energy, this whatever that is behind all life, which gives them life and us life, And it can be referred to as God, but it's just a word. I mean, every man has his own interpretation, perhaps, according to his religious background or lack of it. I mean, to me, it's just a word. And the other side refers to God. Some people do. Some people on the other side refer to God. But it seems to be that no one has seen God. Nobody can really understand what God is. It seems from what they tell us that to them, God is a great power which gives all life, gives life to all humanity. And I don't think that they even, what I can gather anyway, the people I contact, unless I'm contacting people on a very low vibration, nobody seems to bother too much about this God business. It seems to be something that man has invented, and the church has supported, and really has no real basis from the point of view of, for instance, the interpretation of the old biblical interpretation of a man on a throne with a big white beard, waiting to condemn the wicked and praise the good. You know, I mean, this is the old-fashioned nursery or mythological Sunday school aspect, which to the other side, of course, they have become at least a little step further ahead than us, therefore more intelligent and more evolved. They just don't even begin, I don't think they just think of discussing God. I mean, this business of God always pops up. Yes, love, you keep putting your hand up and then put it back again. Who's that? Oh, you ducky, what do you want? Well, what get your hand up for? You want to go out? What do you want, dear? Oh, I'm what now?
Would you think that when you die, we are really just going on and giving it very
but we are still existing in a different dimension. Yeah, obviously. I mean, the world to come is really an extension of this.
When you say where we do,
yeah.
we don't know anywhere, where we go.
Well, in a sense you can say that, but
well, I mean, where do we go?
I know where you're going when you go. No, seriously, I'm not trying. No, the whole point is, what I've tried to explain to you, probably very badly, because I don't profess to be a speaker. What I'm trying to say is that we are all in our own particular environment. We are conscious of this world because we are in it. We revolve with it. Everything in this room is solid to us because we are vibrating in harmony with it. But when we cease to exist in this body, we are no longer vibrating in harmony with this. We are extended away from it. But we can still, at times, be conscious of it because we have this in communication. But they are living in an extension of this on a higher vibration, a different vibration. That's all. I'm going to go away from you. My last question. That's right, love. Have fish and chips when you go home.
Would you be kind enough to tell us when and how you became aware that you were a direct voice?
Oh, what a lovely question. Do you want to buy my book? You can buy my book downstairs.
You can't. You can't.
Yes, I saw one on the counter.
Sorry.
So,
just quickly, I mean,
I couldn't tell you.
Simultaneously, or was it a period of change?
No, as a child, this is an old one that all mediums dish up, but it's true in my case. As a child, I was extraordinarily sensitive. I don't want to go into the full detail, but it's interesting in my book, you know. My parents were separated, and I was brought up by my grandmother. My mother ran away with another man. And by the way, do you know I was a bastard? Yes, that's true. I'm the only medium that will honestly say he's a bastard. I was called the Salvation Army home before marriage. I'll tell you that. It's in my book. But seriously, as a child, I experienced all sorts of things which I couldn't account for. I mean, I just thought every other kid and everybody else saw these things. And I just took it for granted until I started to get a cut across the ear-hole for telling lies. You see, once I came in from school one afternoon, and my grandmother, who was then well over 60 odd, you know, 70, was sitting in a wicker armchair, and as I opened the front door, the parlour door, I could see my grandmother sitting in a chair, and she was fiddling with some sewing. And I saw a woman standing beside her. And I saw her quite distinctly, so much so I could see the mole, this big mole on her face. And I heard voices, but when I got to the inner door, into the kitchen, the woman disappeared. My grandmother was still sitting there, and I, in my innocence, said, "Oh, what's happened to the lady? She's gone." My grandmother said, "What lady? What are you talking about?" And I said, "Oh, the lady that was standing there talking to you." She said, "There's been no lady here." I said, "But I saw her." I said, "She's got a mole on her face." My grandmother gave me such a look. She said, "That's Mrs. whatever the name, Pugh, I think the name was. She's been dead for the last 6 weeks or something." This sort of thing. I mean, and I don't think I'm unusual in this. I think a lot of children do see things, do experience things, and certainly animals see things. Which human beings are grown up stones. The more materialistic we become, the more sophisticated we become, the more we get away from nature and the simple things, the more sure we lose these natural talents. And I think these things are very natural, all of them.
I just said, how you knew it was simply the correct voice? That just come upon you?
Oh no, well I had some indication, it's true. I mean, I sat in a circle for a year, roughly, and much to my own amazement I went, well, after we first of all sat at the table and got wrappings and things, and then we dispensed with that, and then I started to go to sleep. As far as I was concerned, I was right out, and afterwards people said, and I thought that I misbehaved myself. I woke up and I thought, oh my God, they're singing a hymn and they're closing the door up, and I thought, God, I've really done something. I've been asleep, but actually I've been in trance, and they were thrilled to know about what had come through. And then the old bug jealousy crept in. The lady who owned the house, and she was a sweet thing really. She turfed me out because I was a good boy. But that's long. Read the book. And if you can't afford to buy it, get it from the library.